The moment I saw them together, I didn't feel heartbreak, I felt clarity for the first time in years. They say that clothes make the man, but I've always believed it's the other way around. A garment is nothing without the hands that shape it, the mind that envisions it, the heart that breathes life into every seam. For 15 years, I've poured myself into this craft, tailoring suits and dresses for the world's elite people who command attention not just with their wealth, but with their presence. My name is Elias Monroe, and I'm a bespoke tailor, known from Monaco to Milan to Manhattan. My clients trust me to make them flawless, to cloak them in confidence and discretion. It's a quiet power, one I've honed with every snip of the scissors, every thread I pull taut. But this story isn't about my clients or the masterpieces I've stitched for them. It's about the moment when the life I thought I'd measured so precisely began to fray at the edges, revealing a pattern I hadn't seen coming. My wife, Claire, is a vision, a woman who could step into any room and make it brighter, sharper, simply by being there. At 34, she carries herself with an elegance that feels effortless, though I know better. Everything about Claire is curated, from the way she tilts her head when she laughs to the way she arranges our home in Paris, a haven of polished wood and soft light, filled with art we've gathered over a decade together. We met at a gala 10 years ago, where I was fitting a suit for the host and she was orchestrating the evening with a grace that left me speechless. Her voice cut through the chatter like a silver thread, and I was hooked by the idea that I could be the one to keep that light in her eyes forever. Our life since then has been a careful dance. We've traveled to corners of the world most only dream of, sipped wine with artists and diplomats, built a rhythm that, to anyone looking in, seems perfect. And for a long time, I thought it was. I'd come home to our apartment overlooking the Seine, the scent of her jasmine perfume lingering in the air, and feel like I'd sewn myself into something beautiful. But lately, the fabric of that life has started to pull, and I can't tell if it's my hands faltering or hers. It began with the trips. Claire started taking what she called solo vacations, weekends away to places like Santorini or Ibiza, spots drenched in sun and spontaneity. She'd come back with a glow that wasn't just from the weather, her skin kissed by light and her stories full of lazy mornings and seaside walks. I needed a break, she'd say, her smile bright but her eyes drifting somewhere I couldn't follow. I'd nod, chalk it up to her needing space, because who was I to question the woman I'd promised to trust? Then there were the dresses. Claire has always had a refined taste, favoring clean lines and timeless cuts, styles that mirror her poise. But a few months ago, she started asking me to alter her wardrobe in ways that didn't fit the Claire I knew. She wanted off-shoulder designs, necklines that dipped lower than usual, fabrics that shimmered and clung to her frame like they were meant to be noticed. "I'm trying something new," she'd say with a laugh, brushing off my raised eyebrow. "Don't you think it's fun to switch things up?" I'd smile back, pin the seams as she asked, but inside, a question stitched itself into my thoughts: who are you dressing for? I'm not a man who leaps to conclusions. I observe. I measure twice, cut once. So I let the doubts sit, like scraps of fabric on my work table, waiting to see if they'd form a shape. But the more I watched, the more I noticed her phone lighting up with messages she'd glance at and then tuck away, her laughter sharper and less frequent at home, her presence somehow less anchored. It was subtle, like a hemline off by a fraction of an inch, but to a tailor, a fraction is everything. Tonight, I stand in my atelier, a sanctuary of bolts and needles, working on a dress for her. It's crimson silk, bold and flowing, something I designed to make her shine at an upcoming event. The fabric hums under my fingers as I adjust the final seam, the glow of my desk lamp casting shadows across the room. It's late, and the city outside is quiet, save for the occasional hum of a passing car. I step back, eyeing the dress on the mannequin. It's perfect, every pleat, every curve tailored to her form. Yet, as I study it, a strange unease settles over me. The dress fits her measurements, yes, but it doesn't feel like her anymore. It's as if I've crafted it for a stranger, someone who slipped into her silhouette without me noticing. I shake my head, tell myself it's fatigue. I've been working long hours, traveling for fittings, keeping up with clients who demand perfection. Maybe I'm seeing threads that aren't there. But as I fold the dress and set it aside, that question lingers, soft as a whisper against the back of my mind: what's changed? I don't have the answer yet. But I'm about to find out. The streets of Florence carried a heavy scent of leather and aged stone, a city that seemed to breathe history through every crack and corner. I had come here for work, a private fitting with a royal client, a princess who valued privacy above all else, her wardrobe a quiet pact between us and the palace. The session had ended without a hitch, her soft smile lingering as she departed with her entourage, leaving me with a few hours to myself before the flight back to Paris. I decided to walk, drawn to the rhythm of the city, the way the cobblestones pressed against my soles, the murmur of voices blending with the fading light. It was dusk, the sky turning a deep shade of blue, and I had no plan, just the urge to move, to let the day unravel. Claire had told me she was in Santorini, a spontaneous trip she'd planned to unwind, her voice casual over the phone when she mentioned it. I hadn't pressed her for details, my own travels kept me away often enough, and we'd settled into a pattern of giving each other space. So I wandered alone, the evening air cool against my skin, the hum of Florence wrapping around me like a familiar thread. I turned into a narrow alley, drawn by the warm glow of a boutique hotel tucked against the stone walls, its garden terrace spilling out soft jazz and the flicker of candlelight. It was the kind of place that catered to those who could afford to disappear into luxury, ivy tracing the facade, the scene framed perfectly through the glass. I stopped, my eyes lingering on the couples seated outside, their laughter rising above the clink of glasses, the air thick with the scent of wine and roasted herbs. It was a snapshot of something intimate, something Claire and I had once sought out in our early years, back when every moment felt like a discovery. Then I saw her, Claire, sitting at a table near the edge of the terrace, the crimson dress I'd designed for her catching the light, the silk shimmering with every subtle movement. She was with a man, their heads tilted close, her hand resting on the table near his, her laughter bright and unguarded as he lifted a spoon to her lips, feeding her a bite of something sweet. It took a moment for my mind to register what I was seeing, the image so jarring I almost convinced myself it was someone else. But the dress, the way she tilted her head, it was her, unmistakable, in a city she wasn't supposed to be in, with a man I recognized from countless screens. Luca Varela, the travel vlogger who'd turned his charm into a brand, his face a fixture on social media feeds, all sunlit smiles and effortless charisma. I'd never met him, but I knew him, everyone did. And there he was, sharing a meal with my wife, their ease with each other cutting through the distance between us. My feet wouldn't move, rooted to the pavement as I watched, my breath shallow, the world narrowing to the two of them. Her laughter echoed in my ears, a sound I hadn't heard from her in so long, not with me, not like that. The dress I'd sewn for her, every stitch a piece of my craft, now draped over her as she leaned toward him, her eyes alive in a way I couldn't remember seeing. My mind churned, grasping for explanations. When had this started? How had I missed it? But the specifics didn't matter. The truth was there, laid bare in the candlelight, undeniable. I waited for the rush of anger, the heat of betrayal to flood through me, but it didn't come. Instead, a quiet settled over me, heavy and clear, like the moment after a long day when the last seam is pressed and the garment finally takes shape. Everything I'd pushed aside, the trips she took alone, the way her gaze drifted when we spoke, the subtle shifts I chalked up to exhaustion, it all aligned now, the pattern complete. She was with him, and she was happy, more than she'd been with me in years. I stepped back, my shadow melting into the alley's darkness, certain they hadn't noticed me. I didn't want them to. "Elias, you're overreacting," I could imagine her saying if I stormed in, her voice calm, deflecting. But I didn't need to hear it. I turned and walked away, my pace steady, the cool air brushing my face as I moved through the city. Florence felt different now, muted, the chatter fading into a low hum as I retraced my steps to the hotel. I wasn't angry, not yet, maybe not ever. What I felt was release, the weight of our life together lifting, leaving me lighter than I'd been in months. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat by the window, the moon tracing its slow arc across the sky, and let the reality sink in. Claire and I had built something over the years, a life that looked flawless from the outside, but it had been fraying for longer than I'd admitted. Seeing her with Luca didn't break me, it showed me what was already gone. By morning, I had a plan, not born from spite, but from the need to move forward. I'd return to Paris, to my atelier, and start designing a collection that would weave this moment into every line, every fold, without a word of explanation. It wouldn't be loud or dramatic. That wasn't my style. "You'll see it when it's ready," I imagined telling her one day, my voice even, my hand steady as I handed her the sketches. The world would see it too, Luca, the press, everyone, and they'd understand, or they wouldn't. For now, I'd keep quiet, letting the work speak when the time was right. In tailoring, precision matters more than haste, and I had all the time I needed to get this right. The rain drummed against the windows of my atelier, a constant sound that echoed the tension building inside me as I waited for Claire to arrive. I'd been back from Florence for 3 days, carrying the knowledge of what I'd witnessed like a heavy coat I couldn't shrug off. I hadn't said anything to her yet, hadn't even dropped a hint during our brief exchanges over the phone. Instead, I'd thrown myself into my work, sketching designs for a collection that would speak what I couldn't bring myself to say out loud. But today, there was no avoiding it. She'd insisted we meet, her voice tight with frustration when she called earlier. "We need to talk, Elias," she'd said, and I'd agreed, fully aware that her idea of this conversation was far different from mine. She stepped through the door just as the sky outside turned a deeper gray, her figure outlined against the dim light, rain glistening on her coat in small, scattered drops. She closed her umbrella with a quick snap, her movements sharp and deliberate, like she was preparing for something she couldn't quite name. I stayed behind my desk, watching her under the soft glow of the lamp that illuminated the sketches I'd been working on, designs born from the ache I'd carried since Florence. "Elias," she said, her tone gentle but carrying an undercurrent I recognized too well. She slid her coat off, hanging it carefully by the door, and I noticed she was wearing a dress I'd made for her, a sleek black piece from last spring. It still suited her perfectly, though tonight it seemed more like a shield than a garment. I rose from my chair, motioning toward the seat across from me. "You can sit if you want." My voice came out even, controlled, despite the slight shake in my hands as I stacked the sketches into an orderly pile. She didn't take the offer. Instead, she crossed the room, her heels tapping a steady rhythm on the hardwood floor, and stopped just a few feet away, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me pause. "You've been off since you got back," she said, her words direct, probing. "Distant. What's happening with you?" I held her gaze, letting her question linger in the air between us, a thread stretched taut and ready to snap. Part of me wanted her to figure it out, to admit or deflect without me having to say it first, but I wasn't here to dodge the truth any longer. "I saw you," I said, keeping my voice low, steady, each word deliberate. "In Florence. With Luca." Her face didn't shift, but I caught the quick flicker in her eyes, the way her jaw tightened just enough to betray her. She didn't look away, didn't react beyond that small tell. "You told me you were in Santorini," I went on, unable to stop now that I'd started. "But there you were, in a dress I designed, with him, laughing in a way I haven't heard from you in years." Claire's expression softened slightly, but it wasn't guilt I saw, it was something closer to acceptance, like she'd known this moment was coming. She took a slow breath, her posture loosening as she spoke. "Elias, I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. It wasn't something I planned." Her voice was calm, almost too steady, like she'd rehearsed these lines before. "Luca and I crossed paths at that retreat in Santorini. It was supposed to be just work. But then it wasn't. He makes me feel noticed, Elias, alive in a way I'd forgotten I could feel." Her words hit me hard, each one sinking in deeper, stirring a quiet ache I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "And I don't?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper, the question slipping out before I could hold it back. "Everything we've had, all this time together, did that stop mattering to you?" She shook her head, stepping closer, her hand lifting as if to reach for me, though she let it fall back to her side. "It's not about that. You've always been there, solid, constant. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being a team. We turned into pieces of each other's routines. I needed more than that. I needed to feel desired, not just depended on." I turned away from her, my eyes landing on the sketches spread across my desk, the outlines of a collection that would lay everything bare, her betrayal, his presence, our unraveling. I'd expected anger to drive me through this, but instead, I felt empty, the distance between us growing wider with every word she spoke. "So you went to him," I said, my tone flat, stripped of the heat I'd thought I'd feel. "You chose to hide it, to keep me in the dark, acting like nothing had changed while you started something new with him." Her eyes sparked then, a flash of defiance cutting through her calm. "Don't pretend you didn't see this coming, Elias. You've been pulling away too, lost in your projects, your travels, your world. When was the last time you really saw me, not just the wife you come home to, but me?" I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the response stuck in my throat, heavy and unspoken. She wasn't entirely off the mark. I'd been consumed by my work, assuming our life together could coast on its own momentum. "I saw you," I said at last, my voice rougher now. "With him, in Florence. And it showed me what we've turned into, two people running side by side, pretending the gap between us wasn't there." She blinked, her calm breaking for a moment, her eyes catching the light in a way that made them glisten. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice softer, almost hesitant. "Do you want me to go? To call this over?" I looked at her, this woman I'd spent a decade with, who'd once been everything to me, my inspiration, my anchor. Standing there in the atelier, surrounded by the tools of my trade, I realized the life we'd shared had already slipped away. I'd pictured this confrontation differently, louder, messier, but it was just this quiet undoing, the ties between us fraying apart. "I don't know," I said, the honesty of it settling heavily in the room. "But I can't keep acting like everything's fine. Neither can you." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor, her hands twisting together in front of her. We stood there for a long moment, the rain outside filling the silence with its persistent beat. Then she turned, walking to the door with slow, careful steps, pausing with her hand on the handle. She glanced back, her eyes searching mine for something I didn't have to offer. "I'm sorry, Elias," she said, her voice faint against the sound of the storm. "I never wanted to cause you pain." With that, she slipped out, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me alone with my sketches, her absence pressing in around me, sharp and real. But as the quiet took hold, I felt a strange clarity. This wasn't the end I'd feared, but a beginning I hadn't expected, one I'd face on my own terms. The weeks after our confrontation in the atelier passed quickly as I immersed myself in the work ahead, my hands steady over bolts of fabric and spools of thread, each motion deliberate and focused. I had decided to pour everything into a new collection, something I titled The Thread That Lied, a name that captured the unraveling of the life I'd shared with Claire, now laid bare through the garments I created. An invitation had arrived unexpectedly, offering me a chance to debut at Paris Fashion Week, a platform far removed from the private fittings I usually preferred, yet I accepted it without a second thought, knowing this was the opportunity one needed to show the world what had been hidden for too long. Every piece I designed drew from Claire's own wardrobe, twisted and reshaped to reflect the truth of her betrayal, a story told through cloth and stitch rather than words. I stayed up late in the atelier, the soft glow of the lamps illuminating my workspace as I cut and sewed, turning the wedding gown from our past into separated panels, the bodice and skirt drifting apart, or crafting a crimson dress like the one she wore in Florence, its back split open to reveal what lay beneath. A jacket with one sleeve closed off emerged from my hands too, sharp and unyielding, each garment a piece of the puzzle I'd carried silently for months. The day of the show arrived with a sharp chill in the Paris air, the city humming with energy as people gathered to witness the event, their excitement palpable even from backstage where I stood watching the models prepare. They moved with purpose, slipping into the silks and cottons I'd spent weeks perfecting, their calm expressions a contrast to the story they were about to tell. As the lights dimmed and the music began, a slow haunting tune filling the room, I positioned myself in the wings, my pulse even, my eyes scanning the front row where Claire sat, her posture straight and composed, with Luca beside her, his arm resting loosely behind her chair. The first model stepped out, the fragmented wedding gown catching the light in broken flashes, and I heard the crowd's reaction shift from quiet appreciation to a low murmur of surprise. Then the crimson dress appeared, its split back drawing sharper breaths, followed by the jacket and the other pieces, each one building the narrative I'd intended. Claire's face changed as the show progressed, her eyes widening just enough to betray her understanding, while Luca's casual air faded, his jaw tightening as the weight of the display settled over him. The final model walked the runway, her form draped in a black veil that echoed Claire's silhouette, a shadow of the woman I'd once known, and the room fell silent for a moment before the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing louder, filling the space with sound. When I stepped out for the designer's bow, the crowd's response washed over me, a mix of cheers and whispers, and I let my gaze drift to Claire, holding her stare for a brief second, seeing the shock there, perhaps mixed with something like regret, though I didn't dwell on it. I turned and walked back to the shadows backstage, the noise fading as I left the runway behind, my part done for now. By morning, the story had spread beyond the show, the press picking up the threads I'd laid out, their articles hinting at the affair, some even naming Claire and Luca outright as they analyzed the collection's meaning. Online, people debated and dissected every detail, linking the garments to the scandal, and I saw Claire's polished reputation begin to falter, her clients stepping back, her influence shrinking as the truth took hold. Luca faced the same, his endorsements slipping away, his attempts at a vague public statement only stirring more attention, though I didn't track it closely, content to let the work speak for itself. A few days later, Claire's message arrived, short and pointed, her words appearing on my screen without warning. "You didn't just ruin my image. You turned my shame into a display." I read it once, feeling the edge in her tone, the emptiness behind it catching me off guard, as if she'd only now realized the cost of what she'd done. I set the phone down without replying, knowing there was nothing more to add, the collection having said everything I needed to express. The atelier became my focus again in the days that followed, the space feeling lighter somehow, and I started sketching new designs, pieces that weren't about Claire or the past but about moving forward, about finding something new in the work I'd always loved. The sting of her actions hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had lessened, softened by the act of creating something that outlasted the pain, and I found myself settling into a quiet strength, a sense of purpose that carried me toward whatever lay ahead. The air in the atelier hung still and heavy as I adjusted the tension on my sewing machine, the faint hum of its motor filling the quiet space where I'd spent the past hours alone. My hands moved with purpose, guiding fabric beneath the needle, though my thoughts drifted elsewhere, circling the message Claire had sent after the fashion show. I hadn't responded, not yet, but when the door creaked open and she stepped inside, I knew the moment I'd been avoiding had arrived. She wore a plain sweater and jeans, her hair loose and slightly tangled, a far cry from the polished woman who'd once stood beside me at gallery openings. She carried no bag, no pretense, just herself, and the sight of her stirred a dull ache in my chest, not the sharp fury I'd felt weeks ago, but something softer, more resigned. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious, and I nodded, setting the fabric aside as she crossed the room to stand near the workbench. She didn't sit, didn't fidget, just looked at me with eyes that seemed to carry too much weight for one person to hold. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her words deliberate, like she'd rehearsed them. "About what's left and what isn't. I needed to see you, to figure out where we go from here." I leaned back against the workbench, crossing my arms, not out of anger but to steady myself against the flood of emotions her presence brought. I'd spent days wrestling with my feelings, moving from disbelief to a quiet sorrow that had settled deep within me, and now, facing her, I felt the last of my resistance slipping away. "Where do you want us to go, Claire?" I asked, keeping my tone even, though the question felt like a thread pulled taut, ready to snap. Her gaze dropped to the floor for a moment before lifting again, meeting mine with a clarity I hadn't expected. "I don't have an answer that fixes everything," she admitted, her voice softening. "I thought leaving you out of my choices would protect what we had, but it didn't. It just made me realize how far apart we'd already grown. I don't know if I can explain it right, but I felt like I was fading here, with you, and I chased something else to feel alive again." Her honesty cut through me, not because it was cruel, but because it mirrored the doubts I'd buried about my own role in our unraveling. I shifted my weight, glancing at the half-stitched garment on the table, its edges raw and unfinished. "You didn't fade to me," I said quietly. "But I see now that I didn't notice you slipping away. I was too caught up in this, my work, my world, to see what you needed." Claire took a step closer, her hands clasped tightly together, as if holding herself in place. "It's not just your fault, Elias," she said, her tone earnest. "I stopped telling you what I needed. I let it build up until I couldn't stay anymore. What happened with Luca, it wasn't about him, not really. It was about me trying to find something I'd lost, or maybe never had. But it's over now, and I'm here because I want us to decide this together." I studied her face, the lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, and felt a pang of recognition, not for the woman she'd become, but for the one I'd married, the one I'd promised to stand beside. "Decide what, exactly?" I asked, my voice low. "Whether we keep pretending, or whether we let go." She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as if the question had unlocked something within her. "I think we've been pretending for a while," she said, her words heavy with a truth we'd both avoided. "We could try to patch things up, but it'd be like stitching a tear that's too wide, it wouldn't hold. I don't want to keep hurting you, and I don't want to keep hurting myself. Maybe the kindest thing is to step away." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me, not as a blow but as a release. The life we'd built together had frayed beyond repair, and though the realization carried a deep sadness, it also brought a strange sense of peace. "I think you're right," I said, my throat tight but my resolve firm. We've been holding on to something that isn't there anymore. I need time to figure out who I am without this, without us. Claire's eyes shimmered briefly, but she pressed her lips together and nodded, accepting my words without protest. I'll handle the practical things, she said, her voice steady again. The house, the papers, whatever needs doing. You don't have to worry about that. She paused, then took a step back toward the door, her movements slow, deliberate. I hope you find what you're looking for, Elias. I mean that. I watched her, unable to reply right away, the finality of the moment sinking in. You too, I said at last, and she offered a small, fleeting smile before turning to leave, the door closing behind her with a soft thud that echoed in the empty room. I stood there, the silence stretching out around me, and though the ache lingered, I felt the first stirrings of something new, a quiet determination to weave a future from the threads of what remained. The air in Kyoto carried a stillness that wrapped around me like a well-tailored coat, calming the restless edges of my mind as I stood in my new studio, a modest space tucked along a narrow street where wooden buildings leaned close, their tiled roofs catching the faint glow of the afternoon sun. I'd left Paris behind, its ceaseless buzz and gleaming facades fading into memory, and chosen this city for its quiet, its slower rhythm, where the only sounds drifting through my open window were the distant chime of temple bells and the occasional whisper of wine through the branches. My hands rested on the workbench, fingers brushing a length of deep indigo silk, its surface shimmering faintly as I considered the story it would soon hold, a kimono for a woman whose husband had slipped away after a long illness, her strength and sorrow woven into every thread I'd stitch. This was my work now, not crafting garments for the wealthy or the powerful, but for those whose lives stirred something in me, whose tales deserved to be told through the art I could create. I turned to the window, gazing out at the small garden where a lone cherry tree stood, its bare limbs etched against the pale sky, stripped by winter but promising blooms when the warmth returned, a quiet lesson in patience and renewal I'd come to appreciate. The move here had been intentional, a way to step fully into a life that was mine alone, free from the intricate patterns I'd once sewn with Claire, patterns that had unraveled when her choices came into focus. Our marriage had ended not with shouting or bitterness, but with a mutual understanding that what we'd built couldn't hold, and in the months since, I'd found a way to let the hurt fade, channeling it into the collection I'd unveiled in Paris, a series of designs that laid bare the truth without needing words, my final stitch in that story. I'd watched from a distance as the world picked apart her affair with Luca, their polished lives fraying under scrutiny, but I hadn't lingered on it, hadn't let their collapse pull me back into the past. The scissors felt solid in my hand as I measured the silk, my movements deliberate, each cut a moment of focus that steadied me, a rhythm I'd relied on through every upheaval. Silence had become my ally, not the heavy kind I'd carried while watching Claire drift, but a purposeful quiet, a space where I could listen to the world and let it guide my hands. I'd learned that holding back didn't always mean weakness, sometimes it was the strongest choice, a way to protect what mattered and build something new from the pieces left behind. The life I'd known with her had been fragile, a carefully tailored illusion, and its end hadn't broken me but opened a door I hadn't seen before, one I'd walked through to find this place, this work, this version of myself. A gentle knock pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see a young woman hovering in the doorway, her posture uncertain but her eyes bright with something like hope. She was an artist, known in the city for her delicate ink paintings, and she'd come to ask about a dress for her first solo exhibition, a milestone she'd earned after years of persistence. "Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice soft, as if testing the air, and I smiled, setting the scissors down to wave her inside. "Please, just Elias," I told her, gesturing to the low table where a kettle sat steaming, and she settled there, her hands clasped as she began to speak, her words spilling out in a rush of nerves and excitement about the show, the dress she imagined, the journey that had brought her here. I listened, not just to her request but to the story beneath it, the doubts she'd pushed through, the late nights, the quiet pride of finally claiming her place, and when she finished, I nodded, already seeing the shape of a garment that would move with her, light and fluid, its details echoing the brushstrokes of her art. She left as the sun dipped lower, painting the studio in warm gold, and I returned to the workbench, sketching her dress with quick, sure lines, envisioning hand-painted accents that would tie her work to mine, a collaboration born from mutual understanding. This was what my craft had evolved into, not a transaction, but a meeting of stories, a way to honor the people who trusted me with their moments of triumph or loss. It bore little resemblance to the suits and gowns I'd once made for the elite, but it resonated deeper, aligning with the man I'd become after everything had shifted, after I'd learned to let go of what couldn't be mended and embrace what could still be shaped. The evening settled in as I stepped outside, locking the studio door and walking into the cool air, the street now lit by lanterns that cast a gentle glow along the path, guiding my steps as I moved toward the river. I'd come to see that life doesn't follow a neat design. Sometimes, the threads pull apart, leaving you with scraps that don't match, but that's not failure, just a chance to start again, to weave something different from what's left. Claire had been part of my pattern once, but her role had ended, and I'd released her without clinging to what might have been, knowing now that some endings are necessary, even kind, paving the way for beginnings I hadn't expected. I paused by the bridge, watching the river's surface catch the last light, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years, not a perfect peace, but one earned through living with the flaws, letting them guide me forward. The days ahead lay open, a canvas I'd fill with my own hands, and I was ready to discover what they'd hold.